welcome everyone to our third webinar of the series. This webinar is all around harnessing the power of data for DE&I in recruitment, looking at collection, psychological safety, and impact monitoring. So we've got our wonderful co-host, Fran, who is with us today, and we've got our two speakers, Joe and Christina. Some familiar faces. Joe was part of our first webinar series, and some new faces. This is the first time we've had Christina speak on the webinar series, but we're really excited to have you on. I just wanted to pass over to you guys to introduce yourselves and give a little bit of your background, especially if they haven't already watched the first one already. Joe, I'll start with you.
Okay, just very, very quickly, because I know I've taken up space on previous webinars. I founded my business Diversity in Recruitment a couple of years ago, having worked in the recruitment industry, been a recruiter on desk for over 17 years, then moved into a learning and development training role. And my business works with recruitment teams, both agency side and in-house internal teams, to help them get to grips with ED&I in a way that makes sense to them as recruiters and talent people. And through advice and training, we help recruitment teams make their recruitment process accessible, equitable, and inclusive, and get them to understand how to engage, attract, and improve the candidate journey of candidates, underrepresented candidates in particular.
Amazing. And Christina, if you want to give a bit of an introduction to yourself as well.
Thank you. Hello, good people. I'm Christina Bell. I'm actually currently Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Bullhorn. I spent my career in communications and digital marketing roles. So I really love that, stepping into the D&I space, because I really have a strong value for building relationships and the importance of communication. And of course, the topic today, prioritizing data, has been a big part of my professional experience. So I've had a really great time bringing all those things together to come up with a really great D&I program that we have at Bullhorn, and looking forward to sharing that with all of you today.
Amazing. And last but definitely not least, Fran, if you want to introduce yourself as well. We're so excited to have Fran on. She's been leading the DE&I committee at Sourcebreaker, amongst a million other amazing things.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So so I started out in recruitment as well. So worked in that space for 5 years, and then moved into Sourcebreaker when we were very new, and set up the customer success team, and then last year moved over into head of people role, which has been a whole new learning curve of lots of different things, all things HR, and back into kind of recruitment a little bit, as well as looking at ED&I and what we can do to be better in that space as well, and then setting up the committee and so on. So it's been a big change and still very much on the learning journey, but it's been really exciting to get things started with that.
Amazing. And I'm Ellie, and I head up the enterprise customer success team at Sourcebreaker, and we just want to learn basically how the recruitment industry can do better, how we can do better. And today we want to know a little bit more around, like you said, harnessing data to the power of data in recruitment and what that means. And so the first question I have is, why is this topic important, specifically in the recruitment industry? And Joe, I'm going to come to you for that one.
Thanks for that. So when we talk about, there's a step just before, so just so everybody's really clear on what we're talking about. The whole diversity, demographic and inclusion data, what does that actually mean? And in its simplest forms, it's about collecting insight on the people that work for recruitment businesses, and also our candidates, and collecting information about their identity markers, whether that be their protected characteristics, which are the 9 characteristics that are protected by the Equality Act, or whether that be deeper information about their background and circumstances, which could be things like education levels, socioeconomic groups, caring for adults, folks who have families, all that kind of like really rich insight into what makes our people people. And then when we look at the inclusion side, in its simplest form, that's very much about how people feel when it comes to working for our organizations. So do they feel like they can show up to work as themselves? Do they feel like they have a voice on things? Do they feel like they are listened to? Do they feel like their identity isn't holding them back in any way when it comes to their progression, their pay, and their position within the organization? It goes a lot deeper than that, but just in a kind of, top line kind of like nutshell piece. And it's really, really important that we understand the identity of our organization and also how folks feel about working for our organization. I think really I'd recommend it before we start doing any DE&I work at all. I think it's really easy to leap into, some of the kind of, the initiatives and the pledges and all of that kind of cool stuff. But we really need to understand what representation looks like for our business. Who is showing up? Who have we attracted? Who have we kept? But most importantly, who's not in the room? Who are we not engaging with? Who are we not hiring? Who are we not attracting into our talent processes? Who are we not retaining? And also, what is the lived experience of those people? Right? Really, really key. So once we've got all of that information, we can start to look at some of our pain points. And we can start to look at those things that we need to address immediately. So it actually might be there's some really, really quick wins to make people's lives easier within our business and to make them feel more included. It might be that one of the key things is what I try to get it to do is to deter businesses on focusing on just one or two demographics and start to really think about their D&I work from an intersectionality perspective. Often we make assumptions that our businesses are not diverse, and often that, when we dig into that, it's people are looking purely at the optics, which are never a guarantee of people's identity anyway. And what this collecting this data means for us is that we can actually start to see that we've got a really, really rich mix of people within our organization, hopefully, or we haven't. So yeah, it's really, really key. It stops us going down rabbit holes and on journeys that we don't need to go down, and it gets us closer to the business. And also, it's from a psychological perspective, it's also really beneficial for employees to feel like they've had a platform to speak and have their voices heard. And it might be that they've never had an opportunity to actually, be open about who they are and what they stand for and what's important to them and how they feel about working for your business. It's much bigger than that, but I won't go on. I've taken up too much time.
No, absolutely. And Christina, I guess the question I want to ask you is there, in terms of like what is the diversity, demographic, inclusion data, not necessarily like specifically within recruitment, but is there anything else that you want to add around what it is and kind of what it means within a business?
Yeah, Joe, you said so many great things. I was practicing my active listening to not interrupt you because I wanted to just chime in and sort of like rah-rah on everything you said. I think, I would break down the way that you collect data and think about data in two separate buckets. One would be quantitative. That's just the numbers. That's who is in your organization. And Joe talked a little bit about that. Why is that important? Well, if you don't know who you have, then you don't know what you're missing. To your point, Joe, who's not at the table, right? When we talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion in an organization, we start getting to some of the business benefits and problem solving and innovation and all those things. And if you don't understand who's there and who's not there, you don't know what you need to go and look for to fill those empty seats at the table, right? Those empty seats of perspectives and those empty seats of lived experience. So the first part is really just understanding that. And usually it's two simple buckets. It's gender identity, and it's race, ethnicity. And those are really the ways from a best practice standpoint that a lot of organizations are breaking their data down. But if you want to get really sophisticated, you can have a self-disclosure campaign where you ask people another layer of questions, right? Where you're asking about military service and you're asking about LGBTQ plus community, and you're understanding the languages that people speak if you have a global organization. And you can really do some great things when you have that additional layer of information. So quantitative, the numbers is just really the who is there. And then the second bucket would be the qualitative, and that is the what are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And that is critical information to have and to seek. And you can get that in a number of ways. Most organizations that I've worked at have some sort of annual or biannual pulse survey or engagement survey where they just ask employees questions. Really great when you can do that anonymously, right? Give them an opportunity to feel like they can speak freely without restraint. And then you understand what their experiences are like. You see things from their perspectives. Often those of us who are working in HR or executive leadership, we have one view, and sometimes it's really hard to see outside of that. But when you give employees an opportunity to speak, not just current employees, think about your Glassdoor reviews, your LinkedIn reviews, your exit surveys, right? Any form that employees can take to really provide that open, honest feedback will fall in that qualitative bucket. And that's information that really is gold when it comes to specifically D&I and figuring out what to do to help people feel more included.
Amazing. Sorry, go on, Fran.
Yeah, nice. And no, so many good points there to think about. So in terms of like the benefits, I guess, for people to hear of like what are going to be the direct either human benefits or commercial benefits as well for getting a better handle on who is within the business.
Yeah, so I would say a few things. From the data standpoint, it's uncovering opportunities to diversify, right? You might find that here's another one that we don't talk about often, age, right? What's the average age of your organization? And so when you figure that out, and you might realize you have age that's concentrated in one certain demographic, it might be really helpful for you to get some fresh new ideas from someone who's more early in their career. It might be beneficial for you to bring in some talent who's more seasoned so that you have a little bit more balance of perspective there. But whatever it is, you're uncovering the opportunities to diversify. So if you're looking at your gender data, your race and ethnicity data, you might find that you have, this doesn't happen often, but you might find that you have more racial minorities than you do white employees. And that tells you that diversity is not always about just bringing in people of color, or just bringing in women, right? It's about following what the data is telling you. If you have a team that you're sourcing for, and so that's specifically in the recruitment industry, right? You might be hiring for a role. A really good question for you to ask is, what's the makeup of the current team that I'm hiring for, right? That's a question that a lot of times we don't ask as recruiters or as staffers. And it's a really important question, because then that person might go out and look for diversity, and you might not know what kind of diversity you're really looking for, right? So figuring out how to balance out the teams that you're hiring for, the organizations that you're hiring for, is certainly one benefit. Another thing is figuring out what kind of programming to create. So once you have all this information, oh, wow, we have 25% of our employees are military community. We had no idea. What can we be doing to support them, right? How can we engage them in some of what they know from being in the military? Or how can we engage more people in the military community through these employees, because they have incredible work ethic, they're incredibly disciplined, right? We have a remote first organization at Bullhorn, and having a military community aligned with our company is really powerful for that group specifically, because they move around so often. And with the remote first, you don't have the restraint of having to quit an organization because you have to move and pack up and start somewhere else. So when you're able to figure out things about your employees that allow you to create things for them to engage in, now you're looking at that psychological safety. Now you're looking at that increased level of loyalty and retention, right? Because people feel like they're being able to come to work to a place that really gets them and welcomes them and celebrates even who they are. And then the third thing I will say as a benefit is just to really this is another layer that I'm going to introduce, besides just the qualitative feedback on the survey, or just the quantitative feedback with the numbers. But when you think about the way that you can track or keep track of things like performance and career advancement, I mean, that's a sophisticated level of data diving that we are actually getting to right now at Bullhorn, and it's really exciting. But when you can look at a leader and say, hey, it looks like in this department or in this, for this person, people are leaving at a higher rate, or women aren't staying as long in this particular department. Now you're looking for little anomalies around performance and advancement. And that's when you're really getting into the everyday things that people experience that you don't always have a view into. But when you're looking at overall how people are performing, when you're placing candidates, how are candidates performing at this company versus this one? Are there things that are happening over here? For some reason, all my people of color are not lasting over here, right? What's the problem? Let me go ask some questions. Those are sort of like, I would say, a third layer. Once you got that, then you got that. Now you can start really digging deep into figuring out what are some of the anomalies and incredible opportunities that you can uncover at some, within an organization that might be a client of yours, or within your own company that you're trying to figure out.
Nice. Yeah.
I can add a couple to that as
Yeah,
well,
go on.
if possible. Yeah, I think kind of, yeah, just building on that last point, Christina, that piece around maybe it's the side of data collection we don't always talk enough about, right? Actually being able to spot things like bias, like preference, like preferential treatment, like prejudice, like discrimination, and when you've got that, that data collection piece, and you can really segment it, and you can start to spot hiring habits, and you can start to identify kind of where people, who's exiting the business and who's leaving managers, who's not getting promoted, who's not getting pay rises. You can start to see whether that's connected in with people's identity, and that's where some of the serious stuff can start to happen, and we can start to really see those kind of pain points. I mean, that's kind of that's not the most joyful part of the conversation, but we need to understand that bias and prejudice and preference and discrimination is playing out in a lot of businesses, and this data helps us to identify where that's coming from sometimes. Also, just kind of building on the point that Christina made about checking the work that you're doing in certain areas. You might become aware of communities within your organization that you didn't realize were there, and actually you might look at your policies and you might look at your benefits package and you're like, oh, they don't feel very inclusive. We're potentially missing an opportunity to provide really inclusive benefits and make sure this group of people are protected by updating our policies. A lot of policies are not always kind of like fit for purpose. Sometimes they need a refresh, and they need to be seen through an inclusion lens for a diverse workforce. And then finally, I guess one of the most important things about looking at your data at the beginning is you've got something to measure your work on. Ultimately, we should all have goals and objectives that can be measured. And by knowing where our starting point is, we can use that information to see where we're at after 6 months. We can use that information to see where we're at 12 months, 18 months, etc., etc. And we can start to, if we're really, really good at data collection and plotting the activity, we can start to see the interventions that we're introducing and the impact that they're potentially having on the business, especially from a talent attraction perspective as well, when we start to look at the hiring side of this. So that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you had, sorry, Ellie, if I could, you had said something that made me chuckle. You said it's not always the most joyful part when you can sort of find that nugget of something that is a symptom of something larger. And I have to say, I agree, for executives or team leaders, it's probably not. But for me, that's a joyful moment because when you are on the receiving end of bias, or a lot of times you can't prove it. You're like, I feel like something's happening. I don't really know. But one thing I've learned from working with, especially business leaders, CEOs, and all of that, is that the numbers are the thing that convince them, right? So now I can point to it and say, hey, I said I felt like something was happening to me, and that wasn't material enough. rightfully so, right? You can't make business decisions off of somebody's feelings. But if I can prove to you through these numbers that women are having a hard time over here, or if I can prove to you through these numbers that something is happening, that every person of color on this department is on a performance plan, then you can't argue with me when you look at it. And I take great joy in that.
I hear you. Look at me. I'm just trying to create a soft landing, right?
Yeah.
But I'm totally with you. And of course that's what we're here to do, right? That's what we live our careers for. But we both know that it's
they don't
an
like
area,
it.
it's that area we're like, can we just like focus on the good data that makes us like, you know, all the positive stuff, but you know, it's actually used properly, it can be used to you know, to, like you say, we've got to gather the evidence, and that's got to be the numbers, right? We can't always go on that anecdotal piece.
Yeah. And here's a nice suggestion just from my experience, a communication suggestion from my experience. When you're working with your leaders, start with the good data first. Then you like sort of make them feel good, and then you bring in the tough stuff after. It goes over easier when you start with the good stuff.
Stroke their ego a little bit, and then
Exactly.
I think that's one thing, at least I know from the recruitment space, is recruitment businesses are incredible at tracking data. The data that they have access to, they are very numbers driven. They are so numbers focused. They use all of their decisions are based off data. And so the ability to capture all this data and then present it back, I think would lean really well into the mindset that is already inside the recruitment industry. Christina,
and,
one
if you can go to your clients and say, hey, listen, the people that we're bringing in, the candidates, they're looking for more, you know, flexible work-life balance. They're looking for more LGBTQ plus friendly workspaces. They're looking for places that are more friendly to mental health issues and awareness. Then, you know, like out of the 10 candidates I talked to for this role, 7 of them wanted to know about your culture, right? That's why this is important. When you can take that back to them, you can create your own little data points just from the conversations you're having every day with people. It doesn't have to be a huge data dump, but when you can add that value back to your client and go and tell them what the people are saying, it is impactful. Put it in, I love being, listen, 7 out of 10, right? 70%. Put a big number around it. Make them hear you, make them see you, because it's information that you have that they don't have, and you can really be the difference in a lot of the hiring decisions and the time that they take. Get them off the rush. Hey, hold on for a second. We got to spend a little more time because you told me that your team is 7 men and 1 woman. Give me just a little bit more time to try, you know, use some of this information, not as like, oh my God, data is hard, but like, this is really great information that we should have a conversation about before we proceed, right? Let me just tell you really quick, I'm making progress, but let me tell you what I found out and see if we can maybe do anything differently from here. So you can really empower yourself and empower your customers with some of the information that you can bring to them.
It's just getting ourselves as recruiters, getting ourselves into a different mindset, isn't it? I mean, very rarely do I meet recruiters who will have conversations with candidates about, okay, what are you looking from a culture perspective? What values are really important to you? What do you need to show up as you? And I think, you know, this is the whole conversation we're trying to achieve, isn't it, through these webinars, is to, you know, to get recruiters to see the absolute, you know, golden moments and conversations that this can create. And actually by presenting your client with just some really simple facts and data through conversations you had, you can get them to completely review and update their employee value proposition, you know, do something that's really cool with their career pages, start to really think about like, why are we hiding all of this really good stuff that we're doing that's going to make play a big part in our talent attraction strategy. But from my lens, we're just not there yet as an industry, having those conversations in the majority of areas that we work in. Maybe we are in that exec space, and that maybe that retained space, going into what you were saying, Christina, about, you know, having more time. So yeah.
And just to link in, a lot of what I'm seeing from my side is that business development is tough at the moment, and recruiters need to have a USP. They need to be different to actually win business right now. And these conversations is adding value to the client. There is no doubt about it. And these are the conversations that as a recruiter you can use to actually stand out in front of everyone else. If there are, I don't know, 10 different agencies, particularly in London, there's hundreds or thousands of recruitment agencies all going after the same businesses. This is a real way to show that you're dedicated to adding value to the client through, you're not just there to put bums on seats, you're there to actually make a difference and be part of that process. So I love that.
Yeah, and commercially it'll make such a big difference for recruiters as well. Like just in the time that I've been at Sourcebreaker, I've noticed when interviewing candidates that something that is a top priority for people is a business that's serious about ED&I, and that, yeah, even just 5-6 years ago, I don't feel like that was something that was brought up as a priority as much as it is now. So if people aren't, getting this data and starting to take their ED&I journey seriously, and then also as recruiters helping their clients to do that, and then they will fall behind and not get the best talent. So it's crucial. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that links right directly to the what you said on the webinar one, Joe, where if people aren't doing their work now, it's it's massively, well, they won't have a business kind of like in years time, like when this is a priority for a lot of businesses. Like it really is a case that, kind of leaning on what you've said, because it's stuck with me, that the work needs to be done. And kind of taking off on a tangent, but also linking it back to something you've already said. Christina, you mentioned the phrase psychological safety. It was a new phrase to me, kind of in my D&I journey of just kind of as I've been learning as I go and having conversations with you guys and everyone alike. First question is, what is psychological safety? And also kind of tying into that, why is it important?
Yeah, so the interesting part of the definition for psychological safety for me is it's one's belief. So I know it's not even giving you the rest of the definition yet, but that's so important, because you cannot control what somebody believes about themselves or about how they feel, right? So it's one's own belief that they won't be punished for sharing ideas or asking questions or making mistakes. And that's important, because when you are inhibited and you don't know what you can say, what you can't say, when an employee shows up to your organization feeling like that, you don't get the benefits of their lived experiences because they don't share them with you. And that means that you don't get the benefits of their innovative minds and their different perspective when it comes to solving problems and when it comes to helping your clients solve their problems. You don't get their loyalty. You don't get to have that because they don't trust you, because they come to work every day waiting to clock out instead of waiting to figure out instead of coming to work with energy, right? Figuring out how to solve problems and how to meet the bottom line. So psychological safety, to your point, Fran, is new. All of this sort of conversation is newer to the workplace, but when you think about just the foundation of what that means to just anybody in any environment, if you're in a relationship and you don't feel safe, you don't stay with that person, right? If you go to a pub and you don't feel safe there, you leave right away. It's the same thing. You work at a place, you don't feel safe, you don't want to stay there. And so the risk really of not being able to accommodate that for people is huge, because the risk of having to replace roles and deal with attrition and all of that, it's costly, and it's costly to the progress of the teams. It's costly to the morale of people around them, right? There's a whole list of benefits and drawbacks that you can bring up when you talk about psychological safety, for sure.
Amazing. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Anything?
Yeah, no, just absolutely. I just to add in, in terms of, connecting it into the whole kind of like data collection piece. I think that, let's cards on the table, right? You know, there is trust issues and confidence issues with the recruitment industry, right? We're not, you know, we're still working against the tide, right, of a challenging reputation as an industry, especially, you know, in the UK. And I think, you know, we're now asking candidates, you know, who have potentially faced discrimination, prejudice and bias at the hands of a recruiter to share their confidential data. And we're going much deeper than just asking about race, ethnicity and gender. We're asking people, you know, about their sexual orientation. We're asking people about their gender, you know, deep questions about gender identity, you know, whether they've got family responsibilities, caring responsibilities, their age, all these different layers of things that perhaps created a barrier to them previously. And we're saying, can you share that information with us, please? We promise we'll keep it confidential. We absolutely promise it will not be in front of the recruiters or affect the hiring decision. Will you trust us? I'm not sure that's going to land. So we need to, I think it's more than just sending a survey out with a message that builds trust and builds that feeling of inclusion. I think you've got to think about, what does your organization look like from an allyship perspective? Because before I fill in that information, I want to know more than just 2 paragraphs about your equal opportunities. You've got to do some work to convince me that you're serious about ED&I, and actually you're doing something to change the outcomes for me and people in my community, or people in communities that I really care about. So I think it's about, in the messaging, all that kind of, you know, the data protection, the collection, you know, keeping it out of decision making, but also to make people believe that this is something that's really important to you, because the vibe at the moment is very, very tick boxy, right? Data collection is just so somebody in your end client's HR team can tick a box to say, we have tried, but it's too hard. And the more I speak to candidates about this, the more they're becoming really fatigued with data collection. So I think it's a challenge for us to really get that right and build that messaging across everything that we do, not just in the cover email for the survey.
You know, I actually, that brings up a good point. I actually used a external data to help me figure out that including mental health as a part of Bullhorn's D&I programming was the right thing to do. And I didn't have to ask anybody about that because I didn't have their trust yet, just starting at Bullhorn 2 years ago. But I remembered coming across this statistic, and I'm sure many people have heard it: 1 in 4 people worldwide will experience a mental health issue or event in their lifetime. And that was enough for me, right? 1 in 4 people, that's one of us on this call right here who might have something that we have to deal with in a serious manner regarding mental health, depression, suicide, grief, right? Any of those things. And so sometimes, yes, we have to be cognizant all the time, Joe, of what it looks like to the employee. I used to tell people all the time, before George Floyd was murdered, I would never tell people on an application that I was Black, because I didn't know what they were going to do with that information. I don't want you to know. Let's see how far I get before you see my face. And then when you must know, you will know, right? So there is a lack of trust there, I think, specifically from minority groups when it comes to disclosing things about themselves, because they don't know who's on the other end of that computer and what they're going to do with it. But when we have the opportunity to do something, that's sort of a no-brainer, right? Like the mental health example, for me, that was a no-brainer when I came across that statistic. I know I'm going to reach people with this. I know this is going to help people feel a sense of belonging here. Let's throw it out there and see what happens. And it's one of the most popular, if popular is a fair word, programs that we have in D&I. I'll tell you another quick story that you made me think about, Joe. It's like these moments that matter. When I started at Bullhorn, I was pregnant already. And I found out, like, sort of during the very long interview process. They took a long time. I've met with so many people, and I was just finding out at the same time I was pregnant. So I remember telling my boss when she gave me the offer, of course, and like I was like, oh my God, this is, you know, who wants to have this conversation? Now I'm saying yes, but, right? And as a woman, we shouldn't even feel that. It's like it's a part of what everyone knows that we are capable of doing. We should be able to do this thing. But for some reason, still, I felt very uneasy about sharing that with her. She was still a stranger at the end of the day, right? So I told her, yes, I accept. Looking forward to starting at Bullhorn. Also, just so you know, I'm pregnant. So in a couple of months, I'm going to be out for a couple of months, but I promise I will be back. And she could have said something very fair, like, that's all right, that would have been okay. But she was like, congratulations, Christina. That's amazing. I'm so happy for your family. You get 4 months parental leave, and then you can come back and we can just keep rolling. Like, no big deal. And that to me was just such a reassurance for me and my psychological safety, starting this job with a baby in my belly and all the stress that comes along with that. For her to just bring that down for me 10 notches immediately with just one response, right? So sometimes it's not about those numbers. It's not about that disclosure. It's just about, as a human, I think it was you, Joe, who just mentioned, like, it's the people and the everyday actions that matter. It's not about the performative things, and it's not about what it looks like. It's not about the show. If you can get your leaders and your people leaders and your managers to understand that just by being human and just by meeting people where they are, just by understanding the demographics, tying it to the data, right? I'm telling you that we have 25% of people in our organization who are identified as LGBTQ+. We have 30% of the people here who are neurodivergent, right? Our average age is 40. So there's a high likelihood that people have small kids or whatever. If you can get people to sort of just have a headline of some of these things in their minds as they're interacting with people, and have a little moment, like somebody telling you that they are expecting, or someone telling you that they lost their mom, or someone telling you that they lost their mom 2 years ago, and every year around Mother's Day they get a feeling that, you know what I mean? If you can just, if they can just be in those moments with them and spend it doesn't take long, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, giving them that feeling of safety and belonging, just because of them knowing that the organization is diverse, and knowing how important inclusion is, and knowing how important belonging is for the long run, then you have that loyalty, and you have it without always sort of the intrusiveness of asking for the data, right? So some of this could be a lesson to us all about what we can be teaching our people leaders, and what we could be teaching our influencers about how to be and how to act and how to lead in our organizations.
I love that. I'd love to take that, and I wish everybody in every organization had that mindset in abundance. The world would be a much fairer, happier place to exist from a work perspective, wouldn't it? I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That was really inspiring. Really inspiring. I feel very, this is honestly like, I like basically just copying and pasting basically what Joe said, but I just want to get this in front of every single business in the world, basically. That mindset just needs to be regurgitated across everyone. We spoke quite a lot around like data and surveys and that kind of thing, and I don't know, Fran, if there's I was going to go on a little bit of a tangent on one way, but I think it makes sense to go kind of onto your topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of we've kind of spoken a bit about psychological safety and having to achieve that in order to collect the data as well, I suppose. But what are some kind of practical tips that you guys might have on how business owners could actually collect this data, and maybe some pitfalls to really avoid, or things that they should really make sure they're doing when they're thinking about, right, okay, we want to start, we want to get going, we want to collect this data in a thoughtful way and be able to then really do something with it. What are some kind of first steps?
I would say the first thing you should do is know the laws around the data, right? So connect with your in-house legal counsel, or consult with the Google or something, to just make sure that the data you have, because first of all, you should start with the data you have, right? But with the data you have, what can you use it for? So some things we can only collect for use of passing to insurance, like gender and things like that. Other things that employees have to provide willingly, sometimes it's different by country, right? You have to understand those things so that you're not taking data and using it in a way that is opposite of what you've already told people in your disclaimer or disclosure or whatever. So I would start there and then figure out what you have. So you might already have the data around gender, most likely because of medical reasons, and you may already have a significant amount of data around race, but a lot of times people don't self-disclose that if they don't have to. So figure out why you're doing it and make it authentic, make it aligned with your organization. In my organization, we are collecting this data because we want to fill in the blank and be honest about it. We want to diversify, we want to be more competitive, we want to be more innovative, all of those things, and just tell people that we would love for you to help us with our diversity commitments. We would love for you to help us with our commitments to be a diverse global organization. We would help you. We would love for you to help us meet our commitments of ensuring that 50% of our workplace is gender inclusive, or 50% is gender minority or whatever. Help us with that, right? And then you ask them to provide and be able to supplement that. Start a baseline. So if you haven't really collected the data in a very sound way that you can trust, then figure out what that way is. It might be systems you already have or a new system that you have to bring in, and set a baseline. This is where we started, and from here we are going to track progress, and hopefully it's going this way, right, and not the other way. And then so that's on the quantitative side. On the qualitative side, I would say, again, come up with a baseline of 5 to 7 to maybe 10 at the most questions that you want to ask people about their experiences working in your organization. It might be related to your core values and your culture. It might be related to their leader, direct leader, and their experience with them. It should include questions about comp and benefits and all that stuff, for sure. And there's some probably top 10 engagement survey questions. You can probably Google and find something like that. But create a healthy list of 5 to 10 questions and start a baseline with that. Send those out. Try to stick with the questions year over year, so you're comparing apples to apples and don't sort of switch it up when you get halfway in between, because then you have to start the baseline over. You don't want messy data. You want it to be sort of clean, easy year-on-year compare. And then from there, and this is a really, really, really important thing, if you're asking those qualitative questions, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What is your view on this? On a scale of 1 to 10, right? Would you recommend? Would you work here in another 5 years? What's the likelihood? All those kinds of things. Just make sure that you are able to respond to what they're telling you. If they tell you that, you find that you're cutting your data and 70% of women are saying they don't feel safe, you need to address that in a very public, very intentional way. Have them help you understand what needs to happen to change. Use their collaboration in the solution too, because if they're telling you what the problem is, the likelihood of them having suggestions on how to solve for the issue are going to be very high. So don't just ask the questions, but include them in solutioning and actions that follow up what you're asking them about. And then when you ask the questions next year, because you've been able to implement things and because you've invited your employees along for that journey, hopefully you see those scores, if they were unfavorable, right, start to come down and become more favorable. So just a few things for you to get started. Hopefully some of you are already there, and you can just keep iterating on those things. But I think, especially if you're already there, the important part about it is include employees in that solutioning.
I definitely support that. I think they'll expect you. There's nothing more frustrating from a employee perspective where you're asked these questions and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, this is really interesting. This could potentially have a really positive effect if they action this. And then the business that you work for buries the survey and you never hear anything about it. I've seen that happen in businesses that I've worked for, where the information hasn't necessarily been what they wanted, so they buried it. And I find that's an immediate kind of loss of trust there and engagement with your workplace. Some kind of looking at this through a UK lens, I think, as Christina said, don't collect data for data's sake. think, ask the questions where you're genuinely prepared to do the work on. Think really carefully about, if your organization, you've got a feeling that you're probably not doing enough for your working parents, then ask a question and to find out about parental responsibility so you can get some eyes on that what that actually looks like. Don't just ask stuff for asking sake. Advice that I always give to my clients is, the actual survey that you do itself can exclude people, can make people feel othered. And I've seen this happen quite a lot. I mean, I've gone onto a survey and the first thing that they've put has really annoyed me, that they haven't included the range of genders, or they haven't put things in alphabetical order, and they've just put like the majority group at the top of every list of options. And I've dug my heels in and go, no, you can't even be bothered to get that right. So I'm not filling it. I'm not helping you with your data. I know that's just the way that I see it. What we want to make sure is that we're making our surveys inclusive. We are checking our options against, if we're talking about asking people about sexual identity, gender identity, we're getting the language right. We're checking that with, for example, Stonewall recommendations. When we're looking at things like race and ethnicity and religion, we are checking against the Office of National Statistics, the most recent options that were included in the census, just as like a benchmark. My top tip is always make sure that all the options are alphabetical, so our bias isn't creeping in and we're putting majority groups at the top. And I always never ever have an other box at the bottom of a list. It is the way that you other people. Nobody wants to be at the bottom of the list and having to tick another box and not having a voice or a platform to be able to talk about their identity. So I scrap the other box and put right at the top, I prefer to self-identify, and give people like a free type space, especially when it comes to gender identity, sexuality and race and ethnicity, because it is, especially when it comes to race and ethnicity, it's impossible to put every version of somebody's race and ethnicity. So rather than have somebody not see themselves represented, give them an opportunity to be able to self-identify, and make sure that we're not, we're not excluding people because we haven't put the thought into it. And just make sure that we get it right. We check again, and make sure that there's nothing that's gonna let ourselves down when we're going out with a survey like that. Can kind of unpick the whole motivation and the whole kind of mindset around being inclusive. So just some practical tips.
Absolutely, nice. And you touched on it a little bit, I think, Christine, actually, on values earlier, and kind of core values and bringing those in. Is there anything that you'd kind of suggest on when collecting data, how to sort of weave value commitments into the collection and then the follow-up kind of actioning process?
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to continue weaving in your values into all of the initiatives that you're doing, because it shows that you're committed to them. It reinforces it for employees and leaders. And so when you think about a survey sort of question, a really easy thing to do is to ask the question about the values in there. So we at Bullhorn have a value, or actually I'll use our employee vision, is that we have every employee has a sense of belonging, a voice that is heard, and a clear path to success. And that is a form of one of our engagement survey questions. Do you have a sense of belonging and a clear path to success here at Bullhorn? We clearly ask that. And so it just goes to show that our employee vision is not something that we created to just put online or show to people when they're trying to work here, but it's something that we keep a constant pulse on. If our sense of belonging scores are going down, we want to figure out why. We want to figure out where it's happening and why it's happening, and we want to make sure that we stop it and address it right away. So it's really, and especially if your values, if your values are really good, just not to be offensive, but some values are really, really good. If they're really, really good, like Bullhorn has, be human is one of our values. I love that one. Ownership, just doing what you say you're going to do. Another one of my favorite is energy. That's leaving people positively charged. I mean, all of these things are really just about coming to work every day and being a good person to the people around you and being a good leader to those around you. And so when you can reinforce that through your survey questions, it's just sort of like a recommitment to your culture. You know, this is a part of who we are, and we're asking about this because we want to make sure that it's happening every day, and we want to make sure that it's not, if it's not happening, we can ask about it. So yeah, I think you know, aligning your D&I strategy with your company culture and core values is critical anyway. It shouldn't be a thing that's sitting on the side. It should be a part of how you do business. So looping all those things together when you have an opportunity, I think is just really strong for, you know, for driving what your company beliefs and values are.
Yeah, definitely nice. And is there anything on values that you'd want to add on that, Jo?
Do you know what? I actually, as I was just listening to, and when you brought it up, I thought it's not something I've actually kind of prioritized weaving in the values into the inclusion questions, and actually leading the inclusion questions with the values, and actually thinking about how are you currently performing against your values. So yeah, that's what I love about these conversations and bringing in people. Even as somebody who's contributing to the conversation, we show up to learn, right? So that is definitely something that's going into my advice around inclusion surveys. Thank you for that.
Love that.
Amazing. And then I guess one of the questions I had earlier around, we were talking about data collection, and we've mentioned around like collecting actually what your employees are doing and what they're feeling and their beliefs about kind of whether they belong in the business or not. From the data that companies are starting to collect, and I guess my question is, what is the impact of not doing anything? So we've said, you know, if there are 70% of women that are saying that they are feeling unsafe, or there is a particular group of people who don't feel like they belong at work, and you're getting all of this data, and Jo, you said around like businesses that have just completely discarded the data because they kind of want to hide it from anyone. What's the real impact of on the business for not actioning any of the data that they're collecting?
I mean, my brain goes straight to the impact of the human beings in your organization. You know, I think that it can be devastating for people, right? It can be harmful and damaging for people within your organization. I think that you know, if you're going out with these questions and you're asking people to take their time, you know, take time out of their day and to share their personal feelings about your organization, it's about a level of, you know, like respect for them. And I do think I think you lose people if you bury the data because it's not what you wanted to hear, and even worse if you don't action it. So I think you've got to be prepared to be doing the work, and you've got to be prepared for the results and the subsequent changes. Otherwise, you know, I mean, if you're not actioning this stuff, I would, you know, argue that you're going to have a revolving door, and you're not going to be able to retain your people. And also, when you're looking to attract underrepresented talent into your organization, and let's face it, that's at the top of the agenda of so many businesses, if you've not got a case of support, if you've not got the evidence and the receipts and, you know, an EVP to show the actions that you've taken, like we were talking about before, people are savvy on this stuff. You know, we're seeing, you know, your generations, not, you know, not our millennials, our Gen X's, Gen Zers, they want to see receipts. They want to see, they're not interested in your statements, right? They want to see what you've done, why you've done it and what the impacts it's been, and they want that information and that evidence. And I just think it's so detrimental to run these things without doing the work. Sorry, that was a long-winded waffly answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But it's got me thinking.
And I guess the flip side of that is, when this data collection is done authentically and basically when it's done right and when it's done authentically and intentionally, how can recruitment businesses use this for candidate attraction, which is, you know, I guess so kind of spinning everything back to the recruitment industry off the back of this conversation. How can this impact candidate attraction?
Well, I've just had a business that have gone through I've done a survey through one of my partners. I'm going to plug them because it's a brilliant platform, powered by Diversity, and it's a third-party survey, which, I mean, I won't go into it now, but can have an impact on completion rates. And they now have they've now got evidence on representation, so they can talk about the people that make up that business, but they can also talk, they've got evidence also on how people feel about working for their organization, and they've got several points of data that they can now include in their EVP and in all the messaging that they're using to market the roles. And they're not just saying we're a great place to work, where they've started to build, you know, the data to kind of to back that up. And that's going to be, you know, that's recent data. And also they're going to take some of the stuff that they need to build on and go, we haven't got all our ducks in a row. We've still got some work to do. So these are going to be our priority areas. And what they've got is the power of being transparent and knowing exactly where they're at and being able to communicate in a really authentic way, so they don't have to blag it or fluff it or just make stories up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Christina, is there anything you wanted to add to that around how this can, or how it has impacted candidate attraction even within Bullhorn, of having some of that data?
Yeah, there's so many examples of the recruiters saying, hey, I was able to talk to a candidate today about our new military ERG. I was able to talk to a candidate today about our mental health initiatives, and they really appreciated that. So just even sort of the everyday conversations where the recruiters are you know, at the very top end of that sourcing funnel and qualifying people for the culture and for the company and for the role, the questions are coming up right away. So to be able to have answers for that and actual tangible things that we're doing to lean into our employee sense of belonging is really strong. One thing that I thought about when you asked, you know, what's the cost of not responding or, you know, not taking heed to people's feedback is absolutely that they will be disgruntled, they will be unhappy, they will leave, you won't get the innovation, all that stuff. But think about how powerful social media is and how fast they will go to that blog or that Glassdoor review or whatever and talk about their experience with your company. And all you need is for one Black person to say they don't like Black people there, and every single other Black person who reads that is going to be like, you know, even if there might be some debate on whether or not it happened, just the claim is harmful. The claim that the idea that I might have to deal with this at this place is enough to deter me. I was just talking to one of our talent acquisition program coordinators yesterday, and he said that he remembered looking at a Glassdoor review, and it was just it wasn't even a full sentence, but someone wrote LGBTQ plus friendly at the end of their review, and all the other stuff that they said was okay to him, but that was the thing that he needed to feel like he could come here and take that interview and proceed with that process, because he's an openly gay man and he's not willing to be closed at any place that he works. And so if there is really, really a long reach, both positively and negatively, and you might not always be able to have tabs on it because those conversations sometimes happen behind closed doors between candidates, between a candidate and the internet review, right? That's just sitting out there. You don't always know how often it's coming up or how much it's impacting somebody on a positive or negative side, but it is, and it's out there. And the social media world that we live in now connects us from continent to continent, and there's very little that can happen that you can really sort of get away with that you would expect for people to forget about or sweep under the rug. Those days are over.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. To kind of wrap this up, what would be, for people watching this, what would be the top 2 takeaways? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because I didn't prep you for this, but if there were top 2 takeaways off the back of today and the conversation that you want people to walk away from today with, what would they be?
I'll jump in. I would say the first thing is make your efforts authentic, align them to your culture and your values, and know the why and share that openly with your employees, because they'll be much more willing to provide you with data, provide you with feedback if they feel confident that you're asking for it for the right reasons, and if they trust that you will do something about it. The second thing is bring your managers into the data conversation. Don't just keep it high level. Have them have an understanding of who's at your organization, what they want, what they don't like, what they like, and what they can do as the people on the front lines to really make an impact.
Love that. And yeah, absolutely.
I would say make sure that your reasons for collecting data are genuine, and it is to provide that. For a lot of organizations, it is to provide that starting point, to be able to use it as a measurement tool for impact, and also to be able to see those immediate areas that need attention. So understand the importance of what you're about to collect, and make sure that you are ready to action the change that will come after collecting that data. And then make sure that you communicate with people about not going into not disclosing people's identity markers, but definitely as with the inclusion piece, be open and transparent, even if it tells you stuff that you don't want to hear. Okay, it's about being really, really honest with what you've received back and saying, it was great, but we've got room for development, and this is what we're going to do. This is our actions off the back of this survey, and these are the changes that you will experience in the next 6 months. And I think that's really key. Just don't bury it, because that can be super damaging. And people don't forget, your employees are watching you. They want to see how you're going to respond to what they've put.
And I bet half the time they already know as well that things aren't good or things are good. So burying it is, I think I can speak from personal experience that even if it was bad, like not bad data, good data, but showing bad trends or whatever, I would much rather know that the business was aware of it, because half the time you already know, and at least you know that they're actioning it. That's definitely one of the biggest takeaways I've taken from today as well. Yeah,
and not just cherry picking the easy stuff.
Yeah,
if your data comes back and it's obvious that you have an issue that is connected with racism, you need to do the work to figure out how that's happening and stop that from happening, and get people in to support you. And it's not about just going, well, we could do this and then we'll maybe park that for next year. I think you've got to be prepared to then do the work, regardless of how uncomfortable it can be,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And the insights that you give have been incredibly invaluable. It's been amazing. We will see everyone on the next webinar. So please, also any feedback that you have from today or any of the webinars, please keep us posted. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.